James was a black farmer living in a small town surrounded by fields and forests. Every morning, he woke up before sunrise to tend to his crops and feed the animals. Life on the farm was hard, but James loved it. Still, deep in his heart, he had a dream that went beyond the fields, tractors, and endless rows of corn. He wanted to fly. He wanted to own a jet. Every day after finishing his work, James would look up at the sky. Jets would pass overhead, cutting through the clouds with speed and power. He imagined himself in one of those jets, soaring above mountains, oceans, and cities. People in the town often laughed at him when he spoke about flying. "You're a farmer, James," they said. "You'll never touch a jet." Their words were harsh, but James ignored them. Dreams, he believed, were not meant to be small. One evening, while checking his phone after a long day in the fields, James saw an ad that made his heart skip a beat. A second-hand jet was up for sale. It was expensive, far more than anything he had ever earned. The description read, "Private jet, excellent condition, ready to fly. Serious buyers only." James' mind raced. He knew the price was high, but he also knew that if he did not try, he would always regret it. He made a decision that night. He would try. He would see if the dream could become reality. The next morning, James packed his bags and drove to the airfield where the jet was kept. The road was long, winding through towns and highways, and with every mile, his excitement grew. At the same time, a small knot of fear sat in his stomach. This world was not like the farm. This world was for the rich, for people who wore suits, for those who could casually buy anything they wanted. James was just a farmer, and he felt the weight of the challenge ahead. When he arrived at the airfield, he saw the jet gleaming under the sun. It was more beautiful than he had imagined. But as soon as he stepped out of his truck, the real challenge began. The salesman, a tall man in a sharp suit, looked James up and down. There was a hint of doubt, even disdain, in his eyes. "Do you know anything about jets?" he asked, smirking. The words felt like a slap. James swallowed hard. "Yes," he said simply. "I want to see it, learn about it, and maybe buy it." Inside the airfield lounge, other potential buyers watched quietly. Whispers filled the room. "Who is this guy?" some muttered. The atmosphere was tense. James felt eyes on him, judging him, doubting him. He knew this was the moment where he could either give up or prove himself. And James, no matter how nervous, had never been one to give up. He walked toward the jet, hands slightly shaking, but with his head held high. The salesman followed, still skeptical. James studied every part of the jet, asked questions, and listened carefully. Though the terms were technical and unfamiliar, James' determination was clear. He may have been a farmer, but he was willing to learn, to fight for his dream. The tension in the air was thick. The audience can feel James' fear, excitement, and hope all at once. Will the salesman take him seriously? Will he face humiliation in front of everyone? Or will this be the start of something incredible? As James looked at the jet, he felt a spark of possibility. This was more than a machine. It was a chance to change his life, to rise above the limits people had placed on him. And at that moment, with the sun reflecting off the jet's smooth surface, James made a silent promise. No matter what happens next, he would not walk away. The first step had been taken. The dream was no longer just a thought. It was real. And the real journey, the journey filled with challenges, doubts, shocking turns, was about to begin. James had taken the first step by arriving at the airfield and standing before the jet. But the real challenge was only beginning. The airfield was not just a place to see a plane, it was a world of wealthy buyers, slick salesmen, and subtle, almost invisible barriers that could crush anyone's confidence as he approached the jet. The salesman, Mr. Collins, gave him a hard look. "Do you even know how to fly one?" he asked, a hint of mockery in his voice. James felt a sharp sting. The room, filled with potential buyers and staff, seemed to quiet down for a moment. Everyone's attention was on him. The whispers started again, soft but noticeable. "Who is this guy?" someone muttered. James kept his calm. He straightened his back and replied, "I know enough to learn, and I'm serious about buying this jet." His voice was steady, but inside his heart raced. He knew this was more than a transaction, it was a test. Every word, every action, every look mattered. Mr. Collins motioned James to follow him for a tour of the jet. As they walked, the salesman deliberately pointed out complicated parts and used technical terms that James barely recognized. "This is the auxiliary power unit, and if the avionics fail here, the hydraulic system could overload. Do you understand this?" he asked with a smirk. James nodded, listening carefully. He didn't know all the words, but he stayed calm and asked questions to show that he was learning. Outside, other buyers whispered again, some chuckling, thinking James was out of his league. James could feel the weight of their judgment pressing on him. Sweat ran down his forehead. A small voice inside him said, "Maybe I shouldn't be here." But a stronger voice, the one that had pushed him to follow his dream, said, "You've come this far. Don't give up now." As they reached the lounge for a brief break, James received a phone call from his bank. The loan officer's words were cautious, almost doubtful. "Sir, your application is still under review. We can't guarantee approval yet." Timing was tense. If his loan didn't go through, everything could collapse. James' stomach tightened, but he forced himself to breathe slowly. Panic would not help. He reminded himself that determination was stronger than fear. During the break, Mr. Collins continued to challenge him. He asked James to explain the jet systems in detail. James stumbled at first, but then he started using simple, confident words. He described what he knew about engines, fuel lines, and safety systems. He spoke clearly, showing that he was learning quickly and taking the process seriously. A few buyers nodded in quiet approval. Impressed by his courage and honesty, the tension rose as Mr. Collins leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You're ambitious," he said, "but ambition is not enough here." James met his gaze and held it. "I may not have the money yet, or the experience, but I have the will to learn. I came here for a reason. I am serious." The room seemed to hold its breath. The audience feels James' determination, the subtle tension in the air, and the invisible line between humiliation and respect. Every second counts. Every small interaction could tip the balance. Finally, Mr. Collins paused and gave James a long look, perhaps sensing that this farmer was not going to leave without a fight. James had faced the first wave of judgment, ridicule, and doubt and survived. He now understood that the real challenge was not just about money or knowledge. It was about courage, patience, standing firm in the face of humiliation. As James walked back to the jet, ready for the next round of negotiation, he felt a spark of hope. The battle was far from over, but he was no longer just a farmer standing before a jet. He was a man determined to prove that dreams are stronger than fear. And with that thought, the stage was set for the shocking moments that awaited him in the next part. James felt the tension in the air as he walked back toward the jet. So far, he had faced doubt and subtle sneers. But now, the real test had begun. Mr. Collins, the salesman, had clearly decided to push him further. James noticed the way the other buyers' eyes followed him, some with curiosity, some with barely hidden amusement, as soon as they approached the jet again. Mr. Collins began questioning him in ways meant to confuse and embarrass him. "Explain the function of the fuel management system and how it integrates with the avionics," he said, his voice sharp and deliberate. James' mind raced. He had read about these systems, yes, but he was not an expert. He knew he could stumble. James took a deep breath. "The fuel system. It delivers fuel to the engines. And the avionics help monitor and control it," he said carefully. His words were simple, but correct. A few of the buyers nodded slightly, impressed, but Mr. Collins' smirk only grew. "That's very basic," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. "Are you sure you belong here?" A wave of embarrassment washed over James. He could feel his cheeks burning. The other buyers laughed softly, exchanging looks that made James feel even smaller. He wanted to turn away, to admit defeat. The humiliation was strong, stronger than anything he had felt on the farm, stronger than the long hours and the hard work he had done all his life. But then James remembered why he was here. He remembered the long nights watching jets in the sky, imagining himself flying. He remembered the words of his father, who always said, "Dreams are for those brave enough to chase them." And he remembered the sacrifices he had made, saving every penny from the farm to make this moment possible. James squared his shoulders. He would not let these people define him. He would not let their laughter take away his dream. He took a step closer to the jet, his voice calm but firm. "I may not know everything, but I know enough to learn. I know how to work hard, and I am ready to do whatever it takes to understand more." Mr. Collins raised an eyebrow, clearly enjoying the spectacle. "Do you even understand what it takes to maintain a jet?" he asked. James nodded. "I understand it will be hard. I understand people will doubt me, but I am ready for the challenge." The room fell silent for a moment. The whispers stopped. The other buyers were watching, unsure of what to make of this farmer who refused to back down. Some were curious. Some were impressed. James felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to earn their respect. Yet the humiliation was not over. One of the buyers, a young man with a condescending smile, spoke up. "You don't belong here. Why don't you just go back to your fields?" The words hit James like a punch. He felt anger rise inside him, but he controlled it. Anger could be dangerous. Here it could make him lose focus. Instead, he responded with quiet strength. "I am here because I have a dream. I worked for it, and I will not leave just because someone doubts me." The audience in the room felt the shift. James was no longer just the farmer. They could see the determination in his eyes, the courage in his stance. As James looked at the jet, he realized something important. Humiliation could not stop him. Every sneer, every laugh, every doubt was a test, and James was ready to pass it. The next steps in the negotiation would be even harder. But he knew he had found his strength. The audiences left at the edge of their seats. Will James be humiliated further? Or will he turn the tables on the wealthy elites? The suspense builds as the story moves into part 4, where the real turning point begins. James stood near the jet, feeling the tension of the room like a heavy weight pressing on his shoulders. The laughter and smirks from the earlier humiliation had not disappeared completely, but something had changed. He had faced the first real test and survived. Now, it was time to turn the tables. Mr. Collins, the salesman, was still trying to keep control. "You may have survived the first questions," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "But this is real business. Do you even understand the risks involved in owning a jet?" His eyes searched James' face for a hint of fear. James felt the nerves inside him, but he refused to show it. Taking a deep breath, James began walking around the jet, pointing out parts and explaining what he had learned about engines, fuel systems, and avionics. He spoke in simple, clear words, confident and precise. "The engine needs regular checks to avoid problems. The fuel system must be balanced carefully. And the avionics help the pilot control everything safely," he said. A few experts in the room nodded quietly, impressed by his knowledge. The audience of buyers began to look at him differently. Mr. Collins' smirk faltered. He was used to buyers who nodded and agreed without question. He had not expected this farmer to be so prepared, so serious, and so willing to learn. James realized that he could use this moment to his advantage. Every confident answer and thoughtful question he gave made the others see that he was not an amateur. They were beginning to respect him, then. James noticed something that could help him even further. While looking over the paperwork, he saw a small detail in the contract. A clause about maintenance and delivery timing was vague, and it could give him a negotiating edge. His heart raced with excitement. This was his chance to gain control of the situation. He turned to Mr. Collins calmly. "I noticed something in the contract," James said, holding the papers firmly. "The maintenance responsibilities are not clear. Can we discuss how to make this fair for both sides?" Mr. Collins blinked, clearly caught off guard. The other buyers murmured among themselves. Intrigued, James had learned one important lesson. Knowledge and preparation could beat intimidation. With every question he asked, every small point he clarified, he gained more confidence. The power in the room slowly shifted from Mr. Collins to James. The wealthy salesman, who had once smirked and doubted him, now hesitated. A few minutes later, the negotiation turned into a real discussion. James used the loophole he found, presenting it logically and politely. "I want to make sure this jet is safe and properly maintained. That's why I'm asking for clear responsibilities," he explained. His calm voice and reasoned approach impressed not only Mr. Collins, but also the other buyers. The once humiliating whispers were gone. Now, people were watching with curiosity and even admiration. James had turned humiliation into respect without raising his voice, without losing his composure. He realized that courage was not just about standing up, it was also about being smart, patient, and calm under pressure. By the time the discussion ended, James felt a spark of victory. He had gained respect, learned more about jets, and even secured a small advantage in the negotiation. The stage was now set for the shocking turn of events that would change his life forever. As he walked back to the jet, feeling a mixture of relief and excitement, James knew that the biggest challenges were still ahead. But he had learned something crucial. He could face the wealthy elites, their judgments, and even their subtle racism, and still stand tall. The audience is left on the edge of their seats thinking, what will happen next? Will James finally succeed in buying the jet? Or is there another challenge waiting that could stop him in his tracks? The suspense is now higher than ever, leading perfectly into part 5. James had already faced doubt, laughter, and humiliation, but nothing prepared him for what was about to happen. The negotiation had reached a critical point, and the tension in the air was almost unbearable. Mr. Collins, the salesman, had tried everything to intimidate him. But James had held his ground. Now, the moment of truth was near. As James reviewed the contract once again, he noticed a clause he had not seen before. It was small, almost hidden in the fine print, but it gave him significant leverage. The clause allowed the buyer to request a full inspection and negotiation of additional terms before finalizing the sale. James' mind raced. This was his chance not just to buy the jet, but to assert himself and gain the upper hand over the wealthy elites who had doubted him from the beginning. He turned to Mr. Collins calmly. "I would like to use the inspection clause before completing the purchase," James said. His voice was steady, confident, and calm. The room went silent. Even the other buyers leaned in, curious to see what would happen next. The audience could feel the suspense building. No one had expected James, the humble farmer, to make such a bold move. Mr. Collins' face hardened. "Are you serious?" he asked, trying to regain control. "This clause is rarely used. Most buyers just accept the terms." James nodded. "I understand. But I want to make sure everything is clear and fair. I am serious about this jet, and I want to protect my investment." The other buyers were clearly impressed. They had been watching James throughout the day, initially doubting him, laughing at his struggles, and now seeing him take control. The whispers of amusement were replaced by murmurs of admiration. "This man is not just brave. He is smart," they thought. The inspection began immediately. James walked around the jet with the engineers, asking precise questions about the engines, fuel system, and avionics. He took notes, checked every detail, and listened carefully to the explanations. The audience could sense his determination and intelligence. He was proving that he belonged here, despite the odds. Meanwhile, Mr. Collins grew nervous. His usual confidence and smirk were gone. He realized that this farmer, whom he had tried to humiliate, was turning the tables. James was gaining respect, credibility, and even control over the negotiation. It was clear that the power dynamic had shifted. After the inspection, James reviewed the findings and suggested a few reasonable adjustments to the contract. His approach was calm, logical, and firm. "I want this jet to be safe, maintained, and ready to fly," he explained. "These changes are fair for both sides." Even Mr. Collins could not argue against such clarity and reason. Finally, the moment came. James signed the contract, sealing the deal. The once mocking and condescending buyers stared in shock. The salesman, who had doubted him from the start, could only nod, a mix of surprise and grudging respect in his eyes. James had done the impossible. He had bought the jet. As he walked toward the jet, ready to take his first look inside, something unexpected happened. A group of private pilots approached him. One of them whispered, "You don't know yet, but this jet has a hidden feature. Something that can change everything for you." James felt a shiver run down his spine. His heart raced with excitement and curiosity. The audience felt the same suspense. What could this hidden feature be? James stepped closer to the cockpit, anticipation rising with every second. He had won the first battle, but now a new adventure was about to begin. The jet was not just a prize, it was a gateway to a life he had only dreamed of. And something told him that the most shocking events were still ahead. The suspense left the audience thinking, what is this hidden feature? How will it affect James' life? Will this jet lead him to even bigger opportunities or challenges? James sat in the cockpit, hands resting on the controls of the jet he had worked so hard to buy. The engines roared to life, and the vibrations ran through his body. It was a sound he had imagined countless times while working in the fields, and now it was real. Every struggle, every moment of doubt, every humiliation he had faced seemed to vanish in that instant. The sky was no longer a distant dream, what was his to explore. As the jet lifted off the ground, James felt a rush of freedom. Below him, the farm where he had spent his life grew smaller. The town he once feared judging him faded into the horizon. He realized something important. He had not only purchased a jet, he had shattered the limits others placed on him. He had proven that courage, determination, knowledge could overcome prejudice and doubt. The flight was smooth at first, but James knew this was only the beginning. The group of private pilots who had whispered about the jet's hidden feature had been right. As he explored the controls, he discovered an advanced navigation system that could allow him to travel farther and faster than he had ever imagined. It was a secret upgrade included in the jet, something that no one had mentioned during the sale. The realization filled him with awe and a sense of adventure. Landing the jet at a nearby airfield later that day, James felt both exhaustion and exhilaration. People at the airfield stared, amazed at the sight of a farmer stepping out of a private jet. He could feel their curiosity and some admiration in their eyes. For the first time, James understood the power of perseverance and self-belief. He had gone from being laughed at to being respected not because he had wealth or status, but because he had dared to follow his dream. News of James' achievement quickly spread. Local newspapers and social media picked up the story of the black farmer who bought a jet against all odds. Some people still expressed disbelief, but many were inspired. James began receiving messages from young people and other farmers who had once doubted their dreams. They wrote to him, asking how he had managed to overcome ridicule and fear. Each message reminded him that his journey was now bigger than just himself. It was a story that could motivate others. James returned to his farm, but things had changed. He continued to work the land he loved, but now with a sense of pride and confidence that came from knowing he could achieve anything. He often invited children and young adults from the town to see the jet and learn about aviation. He wanted to show them that education, curiosity, and courage could open doors no matter where you started. One evening, while watching the sunset from the cockpit, James reflected on the journey. The humiliation, the sneers, the doubt, they had all been lessons. They had prepared him for the real challenge, believing in himself when no one else did. He realized that true triumph was not only about achieving dreams, but also about inspiring others to believe in theirs. As the story of James, the farmer-turned-jet-owner, spread further, it became a symbol of hope. He proved that racism and prejudice, no matter how harsh, could be overcome with determination and intelligence. And even as he prepared for future flights, perhaps even greater adventures, James knew one thing for certain: the sky was no longer the limit. It was only the beginning. The audience is left with a sense of fulfillment and inspiration, knowing that James' story shows the power of resilience. From a humble farm to the cockpit of a jet, his journey is a reminder that dreams are possible for anyone willing to fight for them, no matter the obstacles. And in the back of his mind, James smiled. knowing that the hidden feature of the jet-hand, the adventures that awaited, were just the start of a new chapter in a life that had already overcome so much.